A billionaire buys an old school and upon visiting the abandoned records, finds a child protecting two infant twins. The secret he discovers makes him rethink everything he knew about his family. The auctioneer's gavel echoed through the hall with a definitive thump, sealing the fate of the property. Jack Bennett, a 35-year-old man whose tailored Italian suit and Patek Philippe watch betrayed his fortune, did not even blink at the final bid amount. $8 million for an abandoned school on the outskirts of town was nothing for someone who managed a billionaire empire, but still. Several incredulous looks turned his way. "Sold to Mr. Bennett," announced the auctioneer with a satisfied smile on his face. Jack barely paid attention to the murmurs that spread through the room. His eyes were fixed on the projected photograph, the imposing three-story Victorian building with red brick walls stained by time and arched windows that seemed like watchful eyes surveying the outside world. There was something about that school, a magnetic pull he couldn't explain, much less ignore. While his assistant handled the paperwork, Jack closed his eyes for a moment, letting his mind wander. Memories of his own childhood emerged like bubbles in still water. The immense Bennett mansion, brimming with priceless works of art, yet utterly devoid of human warmth. Robert and Linda Bennett, his parents, were always too busy with meetings, business trips, and charity events to attend their only son's school performances or simply have dinner with him. "Mr. Bennett?" His assistant's voice pulled him back to the present. "Everything's ready. You are officially the new owner." Jack took the offered keys, feeling their weight in his palm. "Cancel my appointments for the rest of the day," he ordered, already walking toward the exit. "I want to see my new acquisition." The drive to the school was made in silence, with Jack driving his own Aston Martin instead of using his usual chauffeur. The closer he got, the stronger the sensation that something was waiting for him there. It was ridiculous, of course. What secret could an old abandoned school hold that justified this feeling? The wrought iron gate creaked in protest as he pushed it open, making his way through a garden long neglected. Wild vines had taken over the walls, snaking among the bricks like greenish veins. The playground was covered with dry leaves, and the empty swings swayed gently in the breeze, producing a mournful squeak that sounded like a lament. Jack climbed the worn steps of the main entrance, each step echoing in the still afternoon air. The key turned with difficulty in the rusty lock, but at last the heavy oak door opened, revealing the school's interior. The entrance lobby still held vestiges of its former grandeur. The marble floor, though dusty, displayed an intricate geometric pattern, and a majestic carved wooden staircase led to the upper floors. On the walls, commemorative plaques and old black and white photographs revealed fragments of the building's history. Jack walked slowly, his footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. Each classroom he visited seemed to tell a different story. Desks abandoned in haste, student work still pinned to the walls, now yellowed with time, a solitary globe on a teacher's desk. In one of the rooms, a forgotten teddy bear lay in a corner, like a small sentinel guarding memories of children's laughter, long silenced. It was on the second floor that he found the library. Shelves upon shelves of books stretched up to the high ceiling, many of them covered by a thick layer of dust. Jack ran his fingers along a few spines, revealing classic titles of children's literature. Why had such a well-equipped school been abandoned? He suspected the answer lay somewhere in the administrative records. Following his intuition, Jack headed down to the basement where school files were typically stored. The spiral metal staircase leading to the basement was partially rusted, each step producing a concerning creak under his weight. The basement was a maze of metal shelves filled with folders and documents. The dim light filtering through the small windows near the ceiling barely penetrated the darkness. Jack turned on his phone's flashlight, beginning his methodical exploration of the files. That was when he heard it, a nearly imperceptible sound, like a whisper or a muffled sob. Jack froze, straining his ears. For a moment, he thought he had imagined it, but then the sound came again, now accompanied by a soft cooing reminiscent of a baby. "Is anyone there?" he called out, shining his flashlight toward the back of the basement. Silence was his only response, but now that his eyes had adjusted to the dimness, Jack managed to see a subtle movement behind one of the far shelves. He approached cautiously, aware that he could be dealing with homeless individuals who had sought shelter in the abandoned building. "I won't hurt you," he assured, keeping his voice gentle and calm. "I just want to help." Rounding the last shelf, the scene he found made his heart tighten. Huddled in a corner was a little girl, no more than 6 years old, cradling 2 babies protectively. Her large brown eyes were wide with fear, and she clutched the infants even closer as Jack drew nearer. The babies, who seemed to be only a few months old and twins, slept peacefully, wrapped in worn yet clean blankets. The older girl wore a faded, dirty school uniform that Jack recognized as belonging to the very school in which they found themselves. "Hi," he said softly, crouching at a safe distance to avoid scaring her further. "My name is Jack." "What's yours?" The girl hesitated for a long moment before replying in a barely audible voice. "Emma?" "Emma," Jack repeated with a gentle smile. "That's a very pretty name. And who are these little babies?" Her eyes filled with tears. "They're my little brothers, Tommy and Timmy." Jack noticed that, despite the dire conditions, the children seemed as well cared for as possible. Emma had managed to keep the babies clean and fed, judging by a few empty baby bottles on the floor beside them. "Did you go to school here, Emma?" She nodded. "Before they closed it, Ms. Henderson was always nice to me. She gave me extra snacks because she knew that at home." Her voice cracked, and she swallowed hard before continuing. "But now she's not here anymore. Nobody is. Where are your parents, Emma?" It was as though a dam had broken. The tears Emma had been trying to hold back started flowing freely down her grimy face. They're gone," she sobbed. "It was last week. We were coming back from the store. Dad had finally gotten a new job after searching for so long, so he bought a bit more food than usual." Emma sniffled, clutching the babies as if they were her only anchor in reality. "It was raining hard. The car skidded and Jack felt his own heart shatter, seeing the pain in the little girl's eyes. At 6 years old, she already bore a burden many adults would struggle to carry. "Why did you come here?" he asked gently. "I remembered the way to the school," Emma explained, her small voice resolute. "We had nowhere else to go. The landlord had already warned he would throw us out if Dad didn't pay the overdue rent. I knew there were bathrooms and water here, and no one would think to look for us in the basement." Slowly, she shared the rest of their story. Emma's father had lost his job months earlier, and the family survived on the little her mother earned doing house cleanings. The twins were born into this precarious situation, making finances even more difficult. Her father's new job had been a glimmer of hope, brutally cut short by the fatal accident. "You're very brave, Emma," Jack said, feeling a knot in his throat. "How you took such good care of your little brothers?" The girl shrugged, an adult gesture that seemed out of place on her tiny shoulders. "Somebody had to take care of them. Mom always said we have to take care of our family." One of the babies began to stir, making small sounds of discomfort. With the efficiency that comes from necessity, Emma shifted her position, rocking him gently until he settled. Jack observed the scene, feeling a storm of emotions building in his chest. Here he was, a man with more money than he could spend in several lifetimes, witnessing a 6-year-old girl fighting to keep her family alive in a dusty basement. The contrast was so stark it hurt. The light coming through the basement windows was beginning to fade, signaling the end of the afternoon. Nightfall was coming, and the idea of letting these children spend another night in that cold, damp place was simply unbearable. But what could he do? Legally, he would have to call Child Protective Services. That was the proper procedure, the official path. The children would be sent to a shelter, likely separated because of the age difference. Emma would lose her brothers after fighting so hard to keep them together and safe. Jack ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that betrayed his inner turmoil. For the first time in his privileged life, he faced a situation money alone couldn't fix, at least not immediately and through conventional channels. Emma must have sensed his distress because her eyes filled with fear again. "Please don't call anyone," she begged. "They'll take the babies away from me. I promise I'll take good care of them, I swear." The desperation in her voice cut Jack to the core. This little girl had already lost everything: her parents, her home, her childhood, and now she was about to lose the only thing she had left: her family. Jack looked once more at the three siblings. Emma, displaying a superhuman strength hidden in such a small body. The twins, oblivious to the surrounding tragedy, relying on their older sister's love and protection. In that moment, something inside him changed irreversibly. The impulsive purchase of the school, the inexplicable attraction to the place, the urge to explore the basement that very afternoon. Maybe none of it was random. Maybe he was meant to find these children, to do something that really mattered for the first time in his life of hollow privilege. But what exactly? The question echoed in his mind as the last ray of sunlight disappeared through the basement windows, plunging the space into deepening shadows. Jack Bennett, a man who always knew exactly what he wanted and how to get it, was utterly lost about his next step. One thing, however, he knew for sure: he couldn't just turn his back and walk away. Jack couldn't take his eyes off the children as he continued his search through the school's basement. Emma had fallen asleep, still clutching her brothers, exhausted after days of constant vigilance. His flashlight's beam drifted over the dusty shelves, illuminating decades of archived stories in yellowed folders. Then one file in particular caught his attention. Unlike the others, which were neatly arranged in chronological order, this one was out of place, as though someone had recently consulted it and hastily put it back. The faded label read, "Staff, 1988-1990. Driven by a curiosity he couldn't understand, Jack opened the folder. The musty smell of old paper filled his nostrils as he flipped through records of teachers, custodians, and administrative staff. And then his heart stopped for an instant. The black and white photo, though old and somewhat faded, might as well have been a picture of him about 30 years younger. The woman in the photograph had the same almond-shaped eyes, the same face shape, even the same slightly crooked smile he saw in the mirror every morning. The name on the record, Sarah Matthews, custodian. Jack felt his legs falter and had to lean against one of the shelves. With trembling fingers, he began to read the file. Sarah had worked at the school for only 2 years, leaving abruptly in 1990, the year he was born. The details were scant, but there was a residential address penciled in the corner of the page. A soft whimper snapped him back to reality. One of the twins had woken up and started to fuss. Emma, even while sleeping, instinctively soothed him, murmuring words of comfort. The scene stirred something deep in Jack, beyond his initial compassion. He looked again at Sarah's photo, then at the children sleeping on the cold basement floor. 2 stories of abandonment, decades apart, in the same place. Could it be a coincidence? The powerful connection he had felt with the school from the start now seemed to make a strange kind of sense. That was when Jack made his decision. Maybe it was madness, probably illegal, but at that moment, it seemed like the only right thing to do. Careful not to frighten her, he gently touched Emma's shoulder. "Emma," he called softly. "Wake up, sweetheart." The girl opened her eyes instantly, years of premature responsibility having eradicated the luxury of a slow awakening. Her first instinct was to clutch the babies tightly, eyeing Jack warily. "It's okay," he assured her. "I want to help you. Really." "How?" she asked, distrust evident in her young voice. "I have an apartment in the city," Jack explained, choosing his words carefully. "It's big, safe, and warm. There's food, comfortable beds, and a very special person named Olivia who can help take care of you while we figure this out." Emma's eyes widened, a blend of hope and fear dancing there. "But what if they separate us?" "I won't let that happen," Jack promised, surprised at the firmness in his own voice. "You 3 will stay together, I promise." Emma studied his face for a long moment with that ancient wisdom common in children who grow up too fast. "Why do you want to help us?" Jack hesitated. his gaze briefly flicking to Sarah's file still in his hands. "Because sometimes life puts us exactly where we need to be," he finally answered. That answer seemed to satisfy Emma. With surprising maturity, she began gathering the few things she had, some diapers, baby bottles, and a battered teddy bear that had clearly seen better days. Jack took off his expensive suit jacket and wrapped it around the babies to protect them from the night chill. Carefully, he picked up the twins, marveling at how tiny and light they were. Emma grabbed her school backpack and the bag with the baby's belongings, following him upstairs. The walk to the car was tense. Every shadow seemed like a police officer or social worker ready to stop them. But the parking lot was empty, the streets deserted. Jack improvised with his jacket and the blankets to create a makeshift baby carrier in the back seat of his Aston Martin, which was definitely not designed for transporting children. Throughout the drive back to his penthouse, Jack battled waves of anxiety and doubt. What he was doing was technically kidnapping. He could lose everything: his freedom, his reputation, his family business. But every time he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Emma, so small yet so strong, holding one of the twins' hands, he knew there was no other choice. The doorman of the luxurious building where he lived raised his eyebrows upon seeing his impeccably groomed boss arrive with 3 disheveled children, but he was professional enough not to ask questions. In the private elevator up to the penthouse, Emma looked around with wide eyes, clearly impressed but trying not to show it. Olivia, his housekeeper of over a decade, was finishing tidying the kitchen when they entered. The middle-aged woman dropped the dish towel she was holding at the unexpected sight. "Mr. Bennett?" she asked, her voice a mixture of surprise and concern. "Olivia," Jack began, still holding the twins, "I know this might sound crazy, but I need your help. These children need your help." Over the next few minutes, Jack explained the situation as succinctly as possible, leaving out his discovery of Sarah's file. Olivia listened in silence, her experienced eyes assessing the children with a mix of compassion and professional caution. "You realize this is illegal," she finally said, not accusing him, simply stating a fact. "I do," Jack admitted, "but I also know I can't just abandon them to a system that will separate them." Olivia sighed, a sigh Jack knew well. It was the same one she gave when he arrived home late at night, needing strong coffee and a sympathetic ear. A sigh of affectionate resignation. "These babies need new diapers," she declared, already rolling up her sleeves. "And all of them need a warm bath and clean clothes. I'll make a list of what I need, and you'll get everything first thing in the morning." Jack felt immense relief wash over him. Olivia was not only willing to help, but was already taking command of the situation with her characteristic efficiency. "Emma, dear," Olivia addressed the girl with a kindness that brought tears to the child's eyes, "shall we give the babies a nice warm bath while Mr. Bennett fixes something for you to eat? You must be hungry." Emma glanced at Jack as though asking permission. When he nodded encouragingly, she followed Olivia toward the master bathroom, still hesitant to stray too far from her brothers. Alone in the state-of-the-art kitchen he rarely used, Jack began preparing a sandwich, his mind churning with thoughts. Sarah's file burned a hole in his pocket like a secret waiting to explode. Who was she? Why did she look so much like him? Why did it feel like finding that file on the same night he found these children couldn't be just coincidence? The sound of childish laughter from the bathroom interrupted his thoughts. Emma was laughing at something Olivia said, a pure, crystalline sound that seemed to illuminate the entire apartment. It was probably the first time she had laughed since her parents' death. Jack leaned against the kitchen counter, letting out a long breath. His life had turned completely upside down in the last few hours, and he hadn't even begun to process the implications of his actions. But hearing that laughter and seeing how gently Olivia treated the children, he felt that despite the madness he was doing the right thing. Sarah's file and the mysteries it suggested would have to wait. At that moment, 3 children needed him, and for the first time in his privileged life, Jack Bennett was putting someone else's needs above his own doubts and questions. "Mr. Bennett," Olivia's voice called him, "could you come here for a moment? I want to show you the proper way to hold a baby for a bath." Jack smiled, pushing the file deeper into his pocket. It was going to be a long night of learning, and oddly enough, he couldn't wait to start. Morning arrived with a persistent, fine drizzle. Jack hadn't been able to sleep, his eyes constantly drifting to the file he had found in the school basement. Sarah's photo haunted him, the same almond-shaped eyes, the same face shape, even the slightly crooked smile he saw every morning in the mirror. The resemblance was too striking to ignore. Olivia found him in the kitchen at 6 in the morning, staring at a cup of untouched coffee. Emma and the twins were still asleep, exhausted after so many days of uncertainty. "You didn't sleep at all, did you?" she asked, starting to brew fresh coffee. Jack shook his head, placing the file on the counter. Olivia stopped what she was doing, her eyes widening at the photo. "My God," she whispered, glancing from the photo to Jack. "The resemblance is impossible to ignore," Jack finished, his voice rough. "I need to talk to my parents, Olivia. Something isn't right." "What about the children? Please look after them for me," he asked, putting the file in a folder. "Emma will probably sleep a bit longer, and the twins have just been fed. I'll be back as soon as I can." During the drive to the Bennett mansion, Jack tried to organize his thoughts. Surely there was a simple explanation for the resemblance to Sarah. There had to be. The mansion came into view through the ornate iron gates. Jack knew every inch of that property, every corner where he used to play as a child. The place hadn't changed at all, the same cold grandeur, the same artificial perfection. Stevens, the butler, led him to the living room, where Robert and Linda were having breakfast. It was a familiar scene, his father reading the financial paper, his mother delicately sipping tea from fine china. "Jack?" Linda lowered her teacup, surprised. "Son, what brings you here so early?" Without a word, Jack took the file out of the folder and placed it on the coffee table. The silence that followed was deafening. Linda visibly paled, her hands beginning to tremble. Robert slowly lowered the newspaper, his face tense. "Where did you find this?" Linda asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "At the school I bought yesterday, the old St. Clair school," Jack replied, watching their reactions closely. "I want to know why this woman, a former custodian, looks so much like me that she could be my mother." Linda covered her mouth with her hands, tears starting to run down her face. Robert stood, walking over to the window with his hands clasped behind his back, a gesture Jack knew well, signaling deep distress. "Sarah Matthews," Jack continued, his voice quivering slightly, "worked at the school for 2 years and left abruptly in 1990, the year I was born. Why?" The silence stretched on, broken only by Linda's stifled sobs. Finally, she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "I was pregnant in 1989, Linda began, gripping a linen napkin tightly. "It was our first child. We were so happy. We decorated the nursery, picked out a name. But in the 7th month..." Her voice failed, and Robert approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We lost the baby." Jack felt his heart clench at the still raw pain in his mother's eyes. "The doctors said I could never have children again," Linda continued, wiping her tears. "It was devastating. Your father and I, we wanted a family so badly." "And Sarah?" Jack asked softly, starting to put the pieces together. Robert cleared his throat, his voice hoarse. "She worked at the school the Bennett family owned at the time. She was pregnant and alone. The baby's father had died in a work accident, and she couldn't afford to raise a child." "So you bought me?" Jack asked, a bitter note in his voice. "No," Linda exclaimed, standing up. "It wasn't like that, Sarah. She was desperate, working 2 jobs, barely had enough to eat. When she found out we were looking to adopt, it was a difficult decision for everyone," Robert broke in. "But we gave you a life Sarah could never provide, and she wanted you to have that chance." Jack closed his eyes, trying to absorb it all. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Linda approached him hesitantly. "At first, you were so little. Then, over time, it became harder and harder to find the right moment. You were our son in every way that mattered. We were so afraid of losing you." "And Sarah," Jack pressed. She never tried to find me." Robert and Linda exchanged a weighted look. "There was an agreement," Robert finally said. "She promised not to interfere in your life, in exchange for the guarantee that you'd have everything she couldn't give." Jack abruptly stood, snatching the file back. His head was spinning with all these revelations. Part of him wanted to yell, to accuse his parents of having lied to him his whole life. But another part saw the genuine pain in Linda's eyes, the fear and love mixed there. "I need time," he finally said, "to process all of this." "Jack, please." Linda grasped his hand. "You're our son. Nothing changes that." He looked at her hand over his, the hand that had cradled him as a child, wiped his tears, clapped at his achievements. "I know," he answered softly. "But now I need to find out who else I am." Walking to the door, he paused. "I met 3 orphan children yesterday, in the basement of that same school. They made me realize that family goes beyond blood or adoption papers. It's about love, protection, and above all, truth." Leaving the mansion, Jack breathed in the damp morning air. The drizzle had stopped, and a few rays of sunlight were breaking through the clouds. In his pocket, Sarah's file felt like a ton, not just because of what it revealed, but because of what it still concealed. As he drove back to his apartment, where Emma and the twins awaited him, Jack reflected on life's ironies. He had just discovered his own adoption story, and now found himself in the role of a potential adoptive father. Maybe that's how the universe worked. Cycles closing, pain transforming into healing. One thing was certain: he wouldn't rest until he uncovered the whole truth about Sarah Matthews. But now, that quest wasn't fueled solely by anger at the discovery. It was also fueled by understanding that sometimes the hardest choices are made for love, even if in ways we don't initially comprehend. Jack stared at the address scribbled on Sarah's file while his GPS calculated the route. Acacia Street 284, an address from 30 years ago that could be his first real lead about his past. After confronting Robert and Linda, he needed concrete answers, something more tangible than vague explanations and half-truths. The neighborhood the GPS led him to was completely different from what he'd imagined. Where modest houses had likely once stood, there were now commercial buildings and a small park. Jack parked in front of number 284, now occupied by a self-service laundromat. "Looking for something specific, young man?" asked an elderly woman who was sweeping the sidewalk of the neighboring shop. "Actually, yes," Jack replied, showing the file with Sarah's photo. "Did you ever know this woman? She lived here about 30 years ago." The woman adjusted her glasses, studying the photograph. "Oh, that was before the neighborhood got renovated. They tore down all the old houses in '95 to build these buildings, but I don't remember this girl, no." Jack thanked her, feeling the weight of frustration on his shoulders. Another dead end. Back in the car, he picked up his phone and dialed the number his assistant had given him earlier. Megan Ryan, a professional-sounding female voice, answered on the second ring. "Ms. Ryan, this is Jack Bennett. I need your services for a private investigation. It's personal." "I'm free for coffee in an hour, Mr. Bennett. We can discuss the details in person." The chosen cafe was discreet and quiet. Megan Ryan turned out to be a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a demeanor that inspired immediate trust. Jack explained his situation, showing her Sarah's file and recounting his conversation with his parents. "Adoptions in the 90s didn't always follow proper protocols," Megan commented, examining the file, "especially when money was involved. I'll need a few days to start digging into the past, but if there's something to find, I'll find it." Jack nodded, handing her an envelope with an advance payment. As he got up to leave, Megan stopped him. "Mr. Bennett, one question. What do you intend to do when you find Sarah?" The question caught him off guard. What did he really want? Answers? Revenge? A connection? "I just need to know the truth," he finally answered. On the way back to the apartment, Jack found his thoughts drifting to the children. He'd been gone for nearly 5 hours. Would Emma be awake? Would the twins need something? It was strange how, in just 2 days, those 3 little lives had become so intertwined with his. The sound of crying greeted him as soon as he opened the door. Olivia was in the living room, trying to console Emma, who was sobbing uncontrollably as she clung to her battered teddy bear. "What happened?" Jack asked, his heart twisting at the sight of the distraught girl. "She found a photo of her parents at the bottom of her backpack," Olivia explained softly. "It was hard." Jack approached slowly, kneeling beside the sofa where Emma was curled up. "Hey, sweetheart," he called gently. Emma lifted her tear-stained face, her large brown eyes filled with pain. I miss them so much," she sobbed. "I know," Jack said, sitting beside her, "and it's okay to miss them. It's okay to cry, but I have to be strong," she sniffed. "For the babies. Mom always said I was the older sister, that I had to take care of them." "Emma," Jack said softly, "you can be strong and still feel sad. You know, sometimes adults cry too when they miss someone they love." She looked at him curiously through her tears. "Do you cry sometimes?" Jack thought of Sarah, the life he might have had and the lies he'd learned about that day. "Yes, sometimes I do. And you know what? It doesn't make me any less strong. It just shows how much I care." Emma considered his words for a moment. Then, to Jack's surprise, she leaned against him, hiding her face in his chest. Instinctively, he wrapped his arms around her, feeling her small body tremble with sobs. "Want to tell me about them?" he asked softly. "About your parents?" And so, amid tears and tentative smiles, Emma began to share her memories. She talked about how her father always sang off-key in the shower, how her mother made heart-shaped pancakes on Sundays, how the two of them danced in the kitchen when they thought no one was watching. Jack listened, his heart filling with a tenderness he'd never experienced before. At some point, the twins woke up and Olivia brought them into the living room. Still snuggled against Jack, Emma reached out to hold one of the baby's tiny fingers. "Dad and Mum would be happy you're taking care of us," she said quietly, surprising Jack with her words. In that moment, something shifted inside him. Not a dramatic or sudden change, but like a door slowly opening, letting in a light he hadn't known he needed. The mysteries about Sarah and his past still needed to be unraveled, but right then, in that living room, with Emma entrusting him with her broken heart and the twins gazing at him with innocent eyes, Jack discovered a different truth. Family wasn't just about blood or adoption papers. It was about moments like this, about being there, about choosing love even when you're confused and hurt. "Want to help give the babies their bottles?" he asked Emma, noticing her eyes brighten a little, while showing Emma the right way to hold the bottle, with Olivia discreetly supervising. Jack felt a certainty growing in his chest. He would continue searching for Sarah. He needed answers, but that search was no longer his only mission. 3 small hearts needed him, and somehow he needed them just as badly. The phone vibrated during an important board meeting. Jack discreetly checked the screen. It was Megan Ryan. His heart sped up, but he kept his composure, finishing his presentation on the next quarter's projections. As soon as the meeting ended, he rushed to his private office. "Ms. Ryan?" "Mr. Bennett, I've uncovered some interesting information about Sarah Matthews." Megan's voice sounded excited. Besides her job at the school, she also worked as a waitress at the Bluebird Cafe. "That place no longer exists, but I tracked down the former owner." Jack leaned forward in his chair, and he remembers her well. Said Sarah was a dedicated employee, always taking extra shifts. Apparently, she was saving money to enroll in a nursing training program. "Nursing," Jack murmured, absorbing the new details. "Yes, and there's more. I found her records at a local prenatal clinic. The dates coincide with..." Jack's other line rang, interrupting Megan. It was Olivia. "I'm sorry," he told the investigator. "I need to take this call. Can I get back to you?" Switching lines, he heard Olivia's concerned voice. "Mr. Bennett, Emma has a fever. It's nothing serious, but she's asking for you." "I'm on my way," he answered without hesitation. His assistant raised an eyebrow when Jack cancelled all his afternoon meetings, citing a family emergency. The word family slipped from his lips naturally, surprising him. At the apartment, he found Emma curled up in her favorite blanket on the sofa, her cheeks flushed with fever. The twins were asleep in a makeshift playpen nearby. "Jack!" Emma gave him a weak smile as he walked in, and his heart melted. "Hey, sweetheart." He knelt beside the sofa, placing a hand on her hot forehead. "Not feeling well." "My throat hurts," she murmured. "Mom always made tea with honey when I was sick." Jack glanced at Olivia, who was already heading for the kitchen. "Then we'll make you a tea with honey, too." While Olivia prepared the tea, Jack sat on the sofa, letting Emma rest her head on his lap. With hesitant fingers, he began stroking her hair as he vaguely remembered someone doing for him in his own childhood. "Tell me a story," Emma asked, drowsy. Once upon a time," Jack began uncertainly, but his phone started vibrating. It was Megan again, likely with more updates on Sarah. Jack looked at the phone, then at Emma, and made a decision. He silenced the call. "Once upon a time," he started over, "there was a very brave princess who took care of 2 little dragons." Emma smiled, recognizing the reference to herself and the twins, and snuggled closer. Jack continued improvising, surprised by his own creativity. Olivia, coming back with the tea, paused in the doorway to watch them, a gentle smile on her lips. The days that followed established a new routine. Jack began rescheduling his meetings, clustering them in the morning so he could spend afternoons at the apartment. His assistant didn't question him when he demanded his home office be outfitted with an extra monitor so he could work while keeping an eye on the twins playing in their pen. One afternoon, while replying to emails with Tommy, or was it Timmy, dozing on his chest, Jack received another report from Megan. Sarah had taken night classes at a technical school for a few months before vanishing. There were also records of her at a women's shelter, but the dates were incomplete. "Mr. Bennett?" Olivia's voice brought him back to the present. "Dinner's ready." Emma helped make the salad. In the kitchen, Emma stood on a little stool, proudly arranging lettuce leaves in a bowl. Her small hands worked with meticulous care, her tongue poking out in concentration. "Look, Jack, I made the tomatoes look like flowers." "That's beautiful, Emma," he smiled, adjusting the baby in his arms. "You're going to be an amazing chef." Her face lit up at the praise, but then a shadow crossed her features. "Dad always said that too." Jack felt his heart tighten. Gently passing the baby to Olivia, he moved closer to Emma. "You know, I'm sure your dad would be so proud to see you now, taking care of your brothers, helping out in the kitchen." Emma hugged him suddenly, her little hands gripping his shirt. Jack put his arms around her, feeling how she was both fragile and strong at the same time. "Can I tell you a secret?" she whispered against his chest. "Of course. Sometimes I forget what Dad's voice sounded like, and Mom's too. Does that make me a bad person?" Jack pulled back gently so he could look into her eyes. "No, Emma, that doesn't make you bad. Memories are like old photographs. Sometimes they fade, but the love we feel stays strong in here." He lightly tapped her heart. Olivia, rocking the baby, watched with teary eyes. Over the last few days, she had witnessed a remarkable transformation in Jack. The man once focused solely on business and professional success now spent hours on the living room floor playing with the twins, came up with elaborate bedtime stories for Emma, and had surprisingly mastered diaper changes. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Olivia found Jack in his office, staring pensively at Sarah's photo. "You seem different," she remarked, handing him a cup of tea. "In what way?" "Lighter, more present. It's as though the children filled a void you didn't know existed." Jack considered her words, absently running his fingers over Sarah's photo. "You know, Olivia, when I found out I was adopted, I was so angry. I felt like my entire life was a lie. But now I realize family is more than blood or documents. It's about daily choices, about being there, about loving, even when it's scary or difficult." Olivia smiled, noting how he unconsciously tilted his head toward the children's room at the slightest noise. "I think Sarah would be proud," she said softly. Jack looked at her, surprised. "Why?" Because, regardless of the circumstances that led her to give you up, you've become someone capable of giving love and security to 3 little ones who desperately needed both. That night, after Olivia turned in, Jack did his usual rounds. He tucked Emma's blanket back over her. She always kicked it off. He made sure the twins were warm enough. In each little gesture, he felt the weight and joy of his new responsibility. His phone buzzed with yet another message from Megan, more clues about Sarah's past. Jack stared at the notification, then at the children's bedroom door. Discovering his origins still mattered, but now he had found something just as valuable, the chance to be the kind of father to Emma and the twins that he himself wished he'd had. "Mr. Bennett, I need you to see this immediately." Megan Ryan's voice over the phone had an urgency that made Jack pause the contract review on his desk. "What did you find?" "Hospital records from 1990. Sarah Matthews was admitted to give birth on March 15th. A boy." Jack felt his heart race. March 15th, his birthday. "There's more," Megan continued. 3 days later, there's a record of a closed adoption. The baby was handed over to an upper-class family, but the files are sealed. I'm trying to gain access, but a piercing scream broke through the night, cutting off their conversation. Jack froze, instantly recognizing Emma's voice. "I have to go," he said quickly, already sprinting toward the child's room. Emma was sitting up in bed, her small body trembling violently. Her pajamas were soaked with sweat, and her eyes shone with a feverish glint that alarmed Jack immediately. "Emma, what's wrong, sweetheart?" It hurts," she whimpered, clutching her stomach. "It hurts so bad, Jack." Olivia appeared in the doorway, wearing a robe. "Mr. Bennett, she's burning up." Jack touched Emma's forehead and pulled his hand away in shock at how hot she was. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms. She was so warm, it felt like she was radiating heat through her thin pajamas. "Watch the twins," he instructed Olivia as he wrapped Emma in a blanket. "I'm taking her to the hospital." The drive to the pediatric ER was a blur of red lights and deserted streets. Emma, half conscious in his lap in the passenger seat, mumbled incoherently about her mother. Jack had never felt such fear in his life. At the hospital reception, a nurse tried to separate them for admission procedures, but Emma clung to Jack with surprising strength. "Don't leave me," she pleaded, her big eyes brimming with tears and fear. "Never," Jack promised, holding her hand as they filled out the admission forms. His phone buzzed. It was his assistant reminding him of a crucial meeting with Chinese investors first thing in the morning. A multi-million-dollar negotiation he'd been preparing for months. "Cancel it," he ordered curtly, watching a nurse take Emma's vital signs. "Cancel everything." The following hours were a nightmare of tests, needles, and beeping monitors. Appendicitis, they finally diagnosed. She needed immediate surgery. "Only family members can accompany her to the OR doors," the nurse informed him. Jack hesitated for a fraction of a second. "I'm her father," he said, the words coming naturally, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. Emma grew more drowsy from the pre-op medication, but never let go of Jack's hand. When they reached the operating room doors, she looked at him with terrified eyes. "I'm scared," she whispered. Jack knelt beside the gurney, bringing himself to her eye level. "Remember the story about the brave princess who protected the baby dragons?" Emma nodded faintly. "You're even braver than she is, and when you wake up, I'll be right here holding your hand. I promise." "Really promise?" she asked, her voice small and vulnerable. "With all my heart," Jack replied, kissing her feverish forehead. Watching the gurney disappear behind the double doors, Jack felt his legs give way. He collapsed into one of the waiting room chairs, trembling as the adrenaline began to subside. His phone vibrated again. More messages from Megan about Sarah, about the baby she'd given up for adoption, about the mysterious circumstances surrounding it all. Any other time, these details would have consumed his thoughts. But now, sitting in that sterile waiting room, all Jack could think about was Emma, her smile when she made the twins laugh, how she methodically organized her few toys, how her face lit up whenever he came home. The hours dragged on. Jack remained motionless in his chair, watching the comings and goings of doctors and nurses, refusing coffee and any attempts at conversation from other anxious parents in the waiting area. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the surgeon appeared. The operation had been successful. Emma was in recovery and would soon be moved to a room. When he was finally allowed to see her, Jack felt tears sting his eyes. Emma looked even smaller and more fragile in the hospital bed, attached to monitors and an IV in her arm. But she was alive. She was safe. True to his promise, Jack held her hand as she slept, watching her chest rise and fall with each soft, steady breath. Sometime in the middle of the night, Emma's eyes fluttered open briefly. "Jack," she called, groggy. "I'm here, sweetheart. Right here." "You didn't leave," she said with a weak smile. "And I won't," he replied, his voice husky with emotion. "Never." Emma gave his hand a slight squeeze before drifting back off to sleep, and at that moment, Jack realized something fundamental. The mystery of Sarah, his own adoption, all the questions about his past, none of that mattered as much as the present. As much as that small hand trusting in his phone vibrated once more in his pocket. More information from Megan, most likely. More pieces of the puzzle that was his origin. But Jack didn't move to check. Instead, he remained where he was, standing vigil over Emma's sleep, feeling in his heart a certainty that transcended blood and papers. She was his daughter. Maybe not by birth, but by choice, by love. Morning found Jack still in the same position, watching the sunrise through the hospital window while Emma slept. Olivia had sent reassuring messages about the twins, and the office had been informed of his indefinite absence. When Emma woke again, more alert this time, the first thing she did was look for Jack's hand. "You really stayed," she said, her voice raspy but happy. "I promised you, didn't I?" Jack smiled, helping her sip some water. "And promises are sacred." Emma studied him for a moment with that ancient wisdom in her young eyes. "Mum always kept her promises too," she said softly. "She promised I'd never be alone, and I'm not because I found you." Jack felt his heart swell with emotion. He leaned in and kissed Emma's now cool forehead. "And I promise," he whispered, "that as long as I'm alive, you will never, ever be alone." The smile Emma gave him then was worth more than all the answers he sought about his past. Because there, in that hospital room, Jack Bennett finally understood that sometimes the most important questions in life aren't about where we come from, but about where we're going. And his future, he now knew for certain, was irrevocably tied to 3 small orphans who had stolen his heart. The apartment had changed. Jack noticed it the moment he crossed the threshold, carrying Emma carefully in his arms after 3 days in the hospital. Where once there had been a minimalist, impersonal decor, there were now unmistakable signs of family life. Toys organized in colorful bins, drawings pinned to the refrigerator with magnets, a cozy blanket tossed over the Italian leather sofa. "Welcome back, Princess," he smiled, helping Emma settle onto the sofa Olivia had turned into a snug nest of pillows. The twins, in the nearby playpen, began making happy sounds at the sight of their sister. Emma smiled, still pale but visibly glad to be home. Home. The word echoed in Jack's mind with a new meaning. "Mr. Bennett," Olivia approached discreetly. "There are some urgent messages from the office, and Miss Ryan called 3 times today." Jack nodded but kept his eyes on Emma, who was already dozing off, exhausted from the trip. "The office can wait. As for Megan, tell her I'll call back later." In the days that followed, Jack established a new routine. He moved his permanent office setup to the apartment, converting one of the guest rooms into a workspace with a direct view of the living area where the children spent most of their time. Mornings started early, with the twins crying for their bottles. Jack often found himself awake before Olivia, precisely measuring formula in a way that would have astonished his fellow investment bankers. "You're doing it wrong," Emma commented one morning, watching him from the kitchen table where she was having breakfast. "You have to test it on your wrist first to make sure it's not too hot." Jack smiled, remembering how she cared for her brothers in the school basement. "Can you show me the right way?" Her face lit up with responsibility. With all the seriousness her 6 years could muster, Emma demonstrated the proper technique, explaining each step like a little teacher. Afternoons were a mix of work and family moments. Jack learned to attend video conferences with a baby in his arms, to stay focused on financial spreadsheets while singing children's songs, and to deliver investor presentations with Emma's drawings taped in the background. "You've missed 3 crucial meetings this week," his assistant mentioned one afternoon, clearly concerned. Jack glanced through his home office door, where Emma was reading a story to the twins, inventing the narrative from the pictures. "Some things are more important," he answered simply. At night, after Olivia went to bed, Jack took over caring for the children. He discovered a special peace in those moments, bathing the twins, helping Emma with her hygiene while she was still recovering from surgery, and telling stories until everyone fell asleep. It was during one of these evenings that Emma asked the question he'd unconsciously feared. "Jack," she called drowsily, already snuggled in bed, "will you be our dad now?" The question took him by surprise. His phone buzzed in his pocket, likely more news from Megan about Sarah. But he ignored it. He began, choosing his words carefully. "I want to be here for you, Emma, always. But you won't leave, like everyone else." The fear in her voice broke his heart. Jack sat on the edge of the bed, holding her small hand. "Look at me, Emma," he said gently. "Remember the promise I made at the hospital, that I'd never leave you alone?" She nodded. "That promise is forever. For you and your brothers. You're my family now." Emma studied him with those eyes that seemed to see right into his soul. Then, to his surprise, she sat up and hugged him. "I wish Mom and Dad were here," she whispered against his chest, "but I'm glad you are." Later, after the children were asleep, Jack finally checked his messages. Megan had discovered more details about Sarah's time at the school, including some co-workers who were still alive and might have important information. Sitting in his office, looking at the photos accumulating on his desk, Emma smiling despite her surgical stitches, the twins sleeping together, the 3 kids with Olivia, Jack realized his search for Sarah had changed. It was no longer a consuming obsession, but a quiet need to understand his past, now tempered by the responsibility of the present. The weeks went by, bringing a new normal. Emma fully recovered, regaining her usual energy. The twins began crawling, turning the apartment into a minefield of toys and laughter. Jack mastered balancing business demands with the needs of his improvised family. One morning, while trying to feed the twins mashed fruit, an operation that always ended with more food on his suit than in their mouths, Jack had an epiphany. Years ago, when he took over the presidency of the bank at age 30, he thought he'd achieved everything that mattered. Now covered in banana puree and hearing Emma sing off-key in the living room, he realized how wrong he'd been. "You've changed," Olivia remarked one night, finding him asleep on the sofa with a baby in each arm and Emma curled up beside him. "How so?" he asked sleepily, careful not to wake the children. "Lighter, happier. It's like you finally found your place in the world." Jack looked at the children sleeping peacefully. "You know, Olivia, I spent so much time chasing success, numbers, results. And now I see that real wealth is right here, in these simple moments." His phone vibrated quietly in his pocket, another message from Megan. Jack would check it later when the children were in bed. For now, he just wanted to savor that moment, feeling the comforting weight of the babies in his arms and the warmth of Emma by his side. His search for Sarah continued, but now it was just a part of his story, not the central chapter. Because Jack Bennett, the once relentless businessman, had found something more precious than any revelation about his past, a present filled with love, laughter, and tiny hands that trusted him completely. Megan's email arrived on a Thursday night, while Jack was helping Emma with her makeshift homework. Olivia had set up a small educational routine to keep the girl on track, while they decided how to handle her school situation. "I found Sarah Matthews," said the terse message. "She's living in a modest home in the suburbs. The address is attached. She's expecting your visit tomorrow at 10 a.m. Jack felt the air leave his lungs. After weeks of searching, false leads and dead ends, the moment had finally come. "Are you okay?" Emma asked, noticing his expression. "You look pale." "I'm fine, sweetheart," he smiled, trying to hide his nerves. "Just some work news." That night, after the children were asleep, Jack stayed in his office for hours, staring at the photo of Sarah he'd found at the school. Tomorrow, after 35 years, he would finally meet his biological mother. "Should I stay with the kids tomorrow?" Olivia asked gently from the doorway. "Please," Jack replied, his voice hoarse. I don't know what it'll be like." The next morning found Jack standing in front of a modest yet well-kept house with a small front garden. His hands trembled slightly as he rang the doorbell. The woman who opened the door was an older version of the photo he'd carried around for weeks. The same almond-shaped eyes, now etched with fine lines, the same slightly crooked smile, though more hesitant now. "Jack," she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. For a moment, they just looked at each other, decades of silence and secrets hanging between them. Then, with trembling hands, Sarah gestured for him to come inside. The home was modest but cozy, with photographs on the walls and plants on the windowsills. Sarah led him to a small living room where 2 cups of tea were already waiting on the coffee table. "I knew you'd come," she said quietly, sitting down. "Ever since the investigator found me, I knew it was just a matter of time." "So, it's true?" Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. "You're my mother," Sarah finished, tears beginning to stream down her face. "Yes, I am your biological mother." Jack closed his eyes, feeling the weight of that confirmation. Even after all the evidence, hearing it said aloud felt different. "Why?" The question that had tormented him for weeks finally burst out. "Why did you give me up?" Sarah took a deep breath, her hands twisting in her lap. "Your father, Michael, worked in construction. We met when I was still in high school. He was doing some jobs around the campus. It was love at first sight." She smiled sadly at the memory. "We got married as soon as I turned 18. Michael was the kindest man I'd ever known. Hardworking, honest, always dreaming of a better future for us. When I found out I was pregnant, it was the happiest day of our lives." Her hands trembled as she picked up the teacup. "But then, in my 6th month of pregnancy, there was an accident at the construction site. Michael, he didn't make it." Jack's heart constricted at the raw pain still visible in Sarah's eyes. "I had nothing," she continued. "No higher education, no family to support me. I got a job as a custodian at the school, another as a waitress, just to survive, but when you were born..." Sarah covered her face with her hands, sobbing, "You were so small, so perfect. And I had no way to give you the life you deserved. I could barely feed myself. I lived in a tiny room and worked practically around the clock." "The Bennetts," Jack said softly. "How did they come into this?" Linda Bennett was a major benefactor at the school. She had lost her own baby and couldn't have children. When she found out about my situation through the principal, Sarah hesitated. "They offered not only to adopt you, but also to give me some money so I could start over, study nursing like I'd dreamed of." "So you sold me?" Jack couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "No," Sarah exclaimed, pain filling her eyes. "I gave you up because I loved you too much to condemn you to a life of deprivation. The Bennetts could give you everything I couldn't. Education, opportunities, security, the money. It was just to help me rebuild my life, to study, so that one day, when you looked for me, I wouldn't be just the custodian who abandoned you." Jack took in her words in silence. "And after that, I moved away, started studying. Years later, I met David. He was a college professor, a widower with a huge heart. We got married and..." She hesitated again. "We had a son, Ryan. He's 25 now." The revelation that he had a half-brother hit Jack like a punch to the stomach. His world kept expanding and rewriting itself. "Why did you never try to find me?" he asked, voice laced with hurt. "It was part of the agreement with the Bennetts," Sarah said sadly. They feared my presence would confuse you, harm your development. And maybe I was afraid too. Afraid you'd hate me, afraid I wasn't worthy of the man you'd become. Jack stood abruptly, walking to the window. The quiet street outside felt surreal compared to the storm of emotions inside him. Your father would have been so proud, Sarah said softly. Michael was like you, determined, protective of those weaker than him. I heard that you took in 3 orphan children. Jack turned, surprised. How? The investigator mentioned it. And your eyes. They have the same glow Michael had whenever he talked about building a better future for our family. The following hours were filled with stories. Sarah showed him photos of Michael, spoke of his love for country music and his habit of fixing broken things. She talked about Ryan, who had become a teacher like his father. She showed Jack a small box where she kept newspaper clippings of his professional achievements over the years. When they finally said goodbye, late in the afternoon, Sarah hugged him tentatively, and Jack allowed himself, for a moment, to feel what might have been. You have a beautiful family now, she said, wiping away her tears. Those children are lucky to have you. Would you like to meet them someday? Jack surprised himself by extending the invitation. Sarah's smile lit up her face. More than anything. Driving back home, Jack was on autopilot, his mind a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. When he arrived at the apartment, he found Emma sitting on the couch, staring intently at a photo of her parents. Hey, sweetheart, he called softly. Everything okay? Emma shook her head, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. Today is Mom's birthday. Jack sat beside her, his own heart heavy with the day's emotions. Want to tell me about her? Sometimes, Emma began, her voice trembling, I'm afraid I'll forget. Forget how she sang us to sleep, how she tickled my belly, how... You know, Jack interrupted gently, today I learned a lot about my own mother, my biological mother. Emma looked at him curiously through her tears. You're adopted? Yes. And you know what I learned today? That sometimes a mother's love means making very hard choices so her children can have a better life. He picked up the photo from her hands, looking at the woman who had given her life for her children. Your mom loved you so much that she's still taking care of you, even after she's gone. She made you strong, brave, capable of looking after your brothers, just like my biological mom gave me the chance for a better life, even if it meant not being able to be with me. Emma snuggled into his arms. Do you think Mom would be happy you're taking care of us now? Jack kissed the top of her head, thinking of Sarah, of Linda, of all mothers who make impossible choices for love. I'm sure she would, sweetheart. I'm sure she would. That night, after Emma finally fell asleep, Jack watched the children for a long time. The twins in their cribs, Emma clutching the teddy bear that had survived the escape from her parents' home. He thought of Sarah, young and desperate, making the hardest decision of her life, of Linda, channeling the pain of losing a child into loving one who wasn't biologically hers, of Michael, his biological father, who never got the chance to know him yet, whose love lived on through Sarah's stories. And there, in the quiet of the apartment, Jack Bennett, son of Sarah and Michael, son of Robert and Linda, adoptive father to Emma and the twins, finally understood that family isn't just about blood or documents. It's about love, sacrifice, and above all, choices. Choices we make every day to protect, care for, and love the people fate places in our path. Jack straightened his tie for the 3rd time as he waited in Sarah's living room. He had arrived early for his meeting with Ryan, nerves on edge. Sarah was in the kitchen making coffee. The sound of cups clinking filled the anxious silence. He should be here any minute, Sarah said, placing a tray on the coffee table. Ryan is just as nervous as you are. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Jack stood abruptly, his heart pounding. Sarah went to the door and soon voices filled the hallway. Ryan was tall and slim, with Sarah's brown eyes but a face that resembled more his father, David. He wore simple but neat clothes, jeans, a polo shirt, sneakers that were worn but clean. The contrast with Jack's Italian suit was striking. So, Ryan said after the initial introductions, his voice tense. "You're my millionaire brother." Jack felt the weight of the irony in his words. "And you're the college professor." Sarah glanced nervously between them, wringing her hands in her apron. "Ryan teaches literature at the State University," she explained, trying to ease the uncomfortable silence. "Literature?" Jack asked, genuinely interested. "Any specific period?" "Children's literature, actually," Ryan replied, a hint of pride breaking through his defensive posture. "I study how stories help kids process trauma and life changes." Jack immediately thought of Emma, how the bedtime stories he told seemed to help her cope with her loss. "I have a little girl," he found himself saying. "Emma. She recently lost her parents. Stories. Sometimes they're the only thing that calms her." Something shifted in Ryan's expression. "How old is she?" 6. "And there are also the twins, Tommy and Timmy. They're still babies." "You adopted 3 children?" Ryan asked, surprise evident in his voice. Jack briefly recounted finding the children in the old school, watching how Ryan's features softened as the story unfolded. "So you bought the school where Mom used to work?" Ryan mused, an ironic smile tugging at his lips. Fate's got an interesting sense of humor. "Yeah, it does," Jack agreed, sipping his coffee. "What was it like, growing up with Sarah?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Ryan glanced at his mother, who sat quietly in a nearby armchair. "It was good," he finally answered. "We didn't have much money, but there was never a shortage of love. Mom worked as a nurse, Dad taught classes. We lived modestly, but there were always books around, always stories. And heated debates about literature at dinner," Sarah added with a fond smile. Jack felt a twinge of envy. While he had grown up in a mansion filled with expensive objects, yet devoid of affection, Ryan had a modest home brimming with love and culture. You know," Ryan went on as though reading Jack's thoughts, "when Mom told me about you, I got angry at first. I thought of all the opportunities you had, the doors Bennett money opened for you." "Ryan," Sarah cautioned gently. "No, Mom, he needs to hear this," Ryan insisted. "But then you mentioned the kids, how you found them, how you're looking after them, and I realized maybe we have more in common than I initially thought." "How so?" Jack asked. "We both understand the value of family, even if it's not connected by blood. You chose those kids, just like our parents chose me, even though they already had a biological son." The observation hit Jack hard. It was true. Both he and Ryan were products of choices made out of love. "Would you like to meet them?" Jack surprised himself by suggesting it. "Emma, the twins, maybe you could come by the apartment sometime." Ryan looked surprised by the invitation. "I would really like that," he replied after a moment. 2 days later, Ryan stood in the lobby of the luxurious building where Jack lived, visibly uncomfortable with the opulence. But as soon as they entered the apartment, Emma ran to greet them. "Are you Uncle Ryan?" she asked directly, her big, curious eyes sizing up the newcomer. "Jack said you tell stories." Ryan's face lit up immediately. "That's true. Want to hear one?" Emma took him by the hand, leading him to the living room where the twins played in their pen. "Tell a story to the babies, too." Jack watched, amazed, as his brother transformed in the presence of the children. Ryan sat on the floor, creating different voices for each character, gesturing wildly as he spun a tale about a dragon afraid of flying. The twins, usually shy around strangers, were soon giggling at Ryan's antics. Emma settled into his lap as though she'd known him her whole life, occasionally interrupting with questions or plot twists. "He's a natural with kids," Olivia murmured softly, appearing beside Jack with a tray of snacks. "He really is," Jack agreed, watching Ryan gently help Emma hold one of the twins who had crawled up to them. "You know," Ryan said later after the children were asleep, "when Mom told me about you, I had this whole narrative in my head, the rich, privileged brother who never had to fight for anything." Jack nodded, understanding perfectly. "And I imagined you as the brother who had everything I ever wanted, a loving family, genuine memories, a sense of belonging. I guess we were both wrong," Ryan smiled, "and right in some ways. You did have privileges I never had, that's true. But you also had your own struggles. So what now? Jack asked, genuinely curious about the next step. Now, I think we can try being real brothers, not out of obligation or guilt, but because we want to, because maybe there's something we can learn from each other. Jack thought of Emma, how she'd instantly accepted Ryan as part of the family. Children had a special wisdom about these things. Emma's going to love having an uncle who tells such great stories, he remarked with a grin. And I'll love being an uncle, Ryan replied, his voice soft. I've always wanted a bigger family. As Ryan was leaving, Emma appeared in the hallway, sleepy-eyed. Are you coming back, Uncle Ryan? I want to know what happens with the dragon. Ryan knelt down to her level. Of course I'll be back, sweetheart. I have lots more stories to tell. Emma hugged him spontaneously, and for a moment, Jack saw in his brother's eyes the same unconditional love he himself felt for the children. After Ryan left, Jack lingered on the balcony, gazing at the city lights. His world, which until a few weeks ago had revolved around numbers, contracts and meetings, was now filled with stories, children's laughter, and the possibility of new family ties. Emma had once again shown him that family is something we build through love, patience, and an open heart. Through her innocent eyes, the differences between him and Ryan seemed insignificant compared to what they could share. Jack, came Emma's sleepy voice from the balcony door. Tell me a bedtime story. Smiling, Jack picked her up. How about a story of two brothers who were very different but discovered they had the same heart? Emma yawned, resting her head on his shoulder. Is it a happy story? It's becoming one, he replied softly, carrying her back to bed. Jack straightened his tie for the third time while waiting in Sarah's living room. He had arrived early for his meeting with Ryan, nerves on edge. Sarah was in the kitchen, making coffee, the sound of cups clinking against each other filling the anxious silence. He should be here any minute, Sarah said, placing a tray on the coffee table. Ryan's just as nervous as you are. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Jack stood up abruptly, his heart thumping. Sarah went to the door, and soon voices filled the corridor. Ryan was tall and slim, with Sarah's brown eyes but a face more closely resembling his father, David. His clothes were simple yet neat. Jeans, a polo shirt, clean but worn sneakers. The contrast with Jack's Italian suit was striking. So, Ryan said after the initial introductions, his voice tense, "You're my millionaire brother." Jack felt the weight of the irony in his words. "And you're the college professor." Sarah glanced nervously between the two, twisting her hands in her apron. "Ryan teaches literature at the State University," she explained, attempting to ease the uncomfortable silence. "Literature?" Jack asked, genuinely interested. "Any particular focus?" "Children's literature, actually," Ryan replied, a slight pride showing through his defensive stance. "I study how stories help children deal with trauma and life changes." Jack immediately thought of Emma, of how his bedtime stories seemed to help her cope with her loss. "I have a girl," he found himself saying. "Emma. She lost her parents recently." Stories. They're sometimes the only thing that calms her. Something changed in Ryan's eyes. "How old is she?" 6. "And there are the twins, Tommy and Timmy. They're still infants." "You adopted 3 kids?" Ryan asked, surprise evident in his voice. Jack briefly recounted the story of how he'd found the children at the school, watching Ryan's features relax as the story unfolded. "So you bought the school where Mom worked?" Ryan commented, an ironic smile tugging at his lips. "Fate has quite a sense of humor." "It does," Jack agreed, sipping his coffee. "How was it, growing up with Sarah?" The question lingered in the air momentarily. Ryan looked at his mother, who had settled silently into a nearby armchair. "It was good," he finally replied. "We didn't have much, but there was always love. Mom worked as a nurse, Dad was a teacher. We lived simply, but we always had books. We always had stories. And lively debates about literature over dinner," Sarah added with a fond smile. Jack felt a pang of envy. While he grew up in a mansion of expensive objects and little warmth, Ryan had enjoyed a modest household rich in love and culture. You know, Ryan continued, as if reading Jack's thoughts, when Mum told me about you, I was angry at first. I thought of all the opportunities you had, the doors Bennett money opened. Ryan, Sarah gently admonished. No, Mum, he needs to hear this, Ryan insisted. But then you mentioned the kids, how you found them, how you've been taking care of them, and I realized maybe we have more in common than I thought. In what sense? Jack asked. We both know family's worth, even if it's not by blood. You chose those kids, just like our parents chose me, even though they already had one biological child. Jack was deeply struck by the observation. It was true. He and Ryan were both products of choices made for love. Would you like to meet them? Jack asked, surprising himself. Emma, the twins. Maybe you could come by the apartment sometime. Ryan seemed caught off guard by the invitation. I would really like that, he answered after a moment. 2 days later, Ryan stood in the luxurious building's lobby, clearly uncomfortable with the lavish setting. But the moment they entered the apartment, Emma ran up to greet them. Are you Uncle Ryan? She asked directly, her big eyes studying him curiously. Jack says you tell stories. Ryan's face lit up. That's right. Do you want to hear one? Emma grabbed his hand, leading him to the living room where the twins were in their playpen. Tell a story to the babies too. Jack watched in amazement as Ryan transformed around the children. Sitting on the rug, he used different voices for each character, his hands moving animatedly as he narrated a story about a dragon who feared flying. The twins, usually shy with strangers, were soon giggling at Ryan's antics. Emma plopped herself on his lap as though she'd known him forever, occasionally interjecting to ask questions or propose plot twists. He's a natural with kids, Olivia whispered, appearing beside Jack with a tray of snacks. He really is, Jack responded, observing how Ryan gently guided Emma to hold one of the twins who had crawled over to them. You know, Ryan said later, after the kids were put to bed, when Mom told me about you, I had this entire story in my head, the rich, privileged brother who never struggled. Jack nodded, fully empathizing. And I pictured you as the brother who had everything I ever wanted, a loving family, real memories, a true sense of belonging. I guess we were both wrong, Ryan smiled, and also a bit right. You did have privileges I never had, that's true, but you had your own battles too. So what now? Jack asked, genuinely curious about the next steps. Now I think we give being real brothers a try, not out of guilt or responsibility, but because we want to. Because maybe we can learn something from each other. Jack thought of Emma, how she instantly welcomed Ryan into the family. Children had a special wisdom about these things. Emma's going to love having an uncle who tells such amazing stories, he said with a grin. And I'm going to love being an uncle, Ryan replied softly. I've always wanted a bigger family. As Ryan was leaving, Emma appeared in the hallway, sleepy-eyed. You'll come back, Uncle Ryan? I want to know what happens to the dragon. Ryan knelt to her level. Of course I will, sweetheart. I have a lot more stories to share. Emma hugged him spontaneously, and for a moment Jack saw in his brother's eyes the same unconditional love he himself felt for those children. After Ryan left, Jack spent some time on the balcony, watching the city lights. His world, which a few weeks ago revolved solely around numbers, contractors, and meetings, was now filled with stories, children's laughter, and the promise of newly formed family bonds. Emma had shown him once more that family is something you build through love, patience, and an open heart. Through her innocent gaze, the differences between him and Ryan seemed trivial compared to what they could share. Jack, Emma's sleepy voice called from the balcony door. Tell me a bedtime story? Smiling, Jack scooped her up. How about a story of two brothers who were very different but found out they shared the same heart? Emma yawned, laying her head on his shoulder. Is it a happy story? It's getting there, he answered softly, carrying her back to bed. Jack stood in front of the window of his office at the bank as his assistant entered with the file he'd requested. The old school, still abandoned, was visible in the distance, a constant reminder of how his life had changed in recent weeks. Here's the report on the feasibility of turning the property into a community center, sir, his assistant said, placing the folder on the desk, but the partners are concerned about the return on investment. Jack smiled, recalling how he himself used to think only in terms of profit and loss. Schedule a meeting with the board tomorrow. It's time for some changes around here. The next morning, the boardroom was packed. Familiar faces among his partners watched him with a mix of curiosity and apprehension as he prepared to unveil his proposal. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jack began, "over the past few weeks I've learned some valuable lessons about the true meaning of investment." He paused, thinking of Emma and the twins. "Our institution has focused exclusively on financial returns, but there's another kind of wealth we can generate." Eyebrows rose when Jack projected the plans for the old school. "I propose converting the property into a family support center for vulnerable households. We'll offer daycare, job training, psychological and legal support." But Bennett, one of the senior partners, interrupted. "That's philanthropy, not business. Our shareholders will understand that social responsibility isn't just a buzzword for annual reports," Jack replied firmly. "Besides, I plan to use my own resources for much of the project." The room buzzed with murmurs. Jack pressed on, presenting numbers, forecasts, and a detailed plan that included partnerships with universities, one of Ryan's suggestions, and a scholarship program inspired by Sarah's story. "Imagine," he said, his voice impassioned, "how many Sarahs are out there right now, single moms struggling to give their children a decent life. How many kids like Emma and the twins need support and protection?" As he spoke, Jack noticed some of the younger board members beginning to show interest. It was a new generation of executives, more attuned to social issues. "I'm not asking you to abandon our business model," he clarified. "I'm proposing we expand it to include real social impact. And yes, it can be profitable too through tax incentives, brand strengthening, and developing new markets." The meeting lasted for hours, with heated debates and intense negotiations. In the end, though not everyone was fully convinced, Jack secured approval to move forward with the project. Exiting the boardroom, he headed straight to his attorney's office, where another battle awaited him: the legal adoption of the children. "It won't be easy," the lawyer cautioned, spreading papers across his desk. "Your situation isn't conventional. A single man, no prior child-rearing experience, wanting to adopt 3 at once. Make it happen," Jack said simply. "Use every resource you have. These children are my family now." On his way home, Jack took a detour to visit Sarah at the community clinic where she worked. He found her finishing her shift, still in her nurse's uniform. "I have a proposal for you," he said, hugging her. "I want you to head the health department at the new family support center I'm creating in the old school." Sarah looked surprised. "Jack, I'm not sure I have the qualifications." "You have decades of experience in community health. You know the real needs of people, and most importantly," he smiled, "you have the right heart for it." Tears glistened in Sarah's eyes. "The school where it all began is turning into a place of hope and second chances," Jack said, "which I think it was always meant to be." That night at home, Jack found Emma helping Olivia feed the twins. The domestic scene filled him with certainty about the day's decisions. "How was your day?" Emma asked, displaying the maturity that often took him by surprise. "Productive," he replied, scooping one of the babies into his arms. "I made some big decisions." "About us?" she asked, a flicker of worry crossing her face. Jack knelt to meet her eyes. "Yes, about you too. I'm doing everything I can so we can be an official family, forever." Emma's smile lit up the room. "Forever is a long time," she said wisely. "That's exactly how long I want to spend with you," he answered, his heart brimming with love. Later, after the kids were asleep, Jack held a video conference with his team of architects. The school's layout was revised, with spaces redesigned to accommodate classrooms, medical offices, a children's recreation area, and a professional training center. "I want it to be welcoming," he instructed them, "a place where people can find not just help but dignity and hope." In his home office, Jack looked at the photos now decorating his desk. Emma and the twins, Sarah and Ryan, even an old photo of his biological father that Sarah had given him. Each face represented a piece of his journey, a puzzle whose meaning was finally becoming clear. His phone rang. It was Ryan, calling to brainstorm ideas for the center's educational program. His brother had become an enthusiastic partner in the Project E, offering his academic insight and social sensitivity. As they discussed possibilities and plans, Jack realized he had found something he never knew he was missing. A greater purpose than profit and status, a chance to transform his own story of adoption and reunion into hope for others. A soft cry from one of the twins brought him back to the moment. Wrapping up the call, Jack went to the nursery, picking up little Tommy or Timmy in his arms. As he rocked the baby back to sleep, he looked out the window at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, other Emmas and other babies needed help. Other Sarahs were fighting to provide for their children. Jack Bennett, who once measured success only in numbers, now understood that his true legacy would be measured in lives changed, families strengthened, hopes renewed, and it had all begun with an impulsive purchase of an abandoned school and 3 small hearts that had forever changed his own. Life has interesting ways of fitting the broken pieces together, Jack thought, watching Ryan tell a story to Emma on the living room rug. The twins, now more stable in their crawling, were circling their uncle, occasionally tugging on his shirt for attention. Sarah, seated on the couch, watched the scene with tearful eyes, her hands occupied by knitting, a new skill she was learning to make clothes for the babies. Sunday dinners had become a tradition over the past few weeks. Ryan brought new books for Emma. Sarah prepared dishes Jack vaguely remembered his biological father liking, and slowly, a natural family routine emerged. "I think it's time," Jack said to Sarah after the children were in bed that night. "I need to talk to Robert and Linda." Sarah nodded understandingly. "They raised you, Jack. Regardless of any mistakes they might have made, their love for you is real." The next morning, Jack found himself once again at the Bennett mansion. This time, though, he felt no anger in his heart, only a profound need for understanding and reconciliation. Stevens, the butler, seemed relieved to see him. "Your parents are in the sunroom, sir," he said with a small smile. Linda was watering her orchids when Jack entered, while Robert read the newspaper in his favorite chair. The scene was so familiar that for a moment he was transported back to his childhood. "Jack," Linda exclaimed, nearly dropping her watering can. "Son." "Mom," he answered softly, the word carrying new weight now. "Dad, can we talk?" The 3 of them sat down, the air heavy with unspoken words. Jack took a deep breath, drawing strength from thoughts of Emma and her childlike courage. "I met Sarah," he began, watching his adoptive parents tense, "and Ryan, my half-brother, and I understand now. I understand a lot more than before." Linda started crying silently, while Robert gripped her hand firmly. "You gave me a life Sarah couldn't," Jack continued. "Opportunities, education, security. More than that, you gave me love. Maybe not always in the way I needed, but it was always there. We only wanted what was best for you," Linda sobbed. "But maybe we lost our way. We got wrapped up in success, and we hid the truth," Robert added hoarsely, "out of fear. Fear of losing you." Jack rose and walked to the window that overlooked the garden where he used to play. "You know, I have 3 kids now, Emma and the twins, and every day with them teaches me something new about love, about family." Turning to face his parents, Jack offered a gentle smile. "And what I've learned is that family doesn't have to be defined by past choices. It can expand, be renewed, be rebuilt." "What do you mean?" Robert asked, a note of hope in his voice. "I want you to meet Sarah and Ryan. I want you to meet your grandchildren, because that's what Emma and the twins are now. I want us all to be a family, no matter how complicated or unconventional it might seem." Linda stood shakily, stepping closer to Jack. "Do you forgive us?" Jack embraced her, inhaling the familiar scent from his childhood. "There's nothing to forgive. We can only build from here." The big get-together was arranged for the following Sunday at Jack's apartment. Emma, excited at the thought of having even more family, insisted on helping with the decorations. Colorful balloons floated around and her drawings graced the walls. Sarah arrived first with Ryan, carrying a homemade pie. Linda and Robert came soon after, laden with gifts for the children. The initial moments were tense, decades of secrets and guilt hanging in the air. But then Emma, with her characteristic innocence, ran up to Linda. "Are you my grandma now?" she asked point blank. Linda knelt down, tears in her eyes. "If you want me to be, sweetheart." "Cool," Emma exclaimed. "Now I have two grandmas. Come on, Grandma Sarah, look at the drawings I made." And so, guided by the wisdom of a 6-year-old, the barriers began to fall. Robert and Ryan discovered a common interest in chess. Linda and Sarah exchanged recipes and stories about Jack. The twins charmed everyone with their toothless smiles and tentative first steps. Over dinner, Jack stood to make an announcement. "Today is special not only because we're bringing our family together, but also because I just got official confirmation. Emma and the twins' adoption is approved." The room erupted in applause and congratulations. Emma leapt from her seat to hug Jack, while the babies clapped their hands, not fully understanding why. "And there's more," Jack continued. "The school renovation is almost finished. In 1 month, we'll open the Bennett Matthews Family Support Center." Sarah covered her mouth, emotional at hearing her maiden name included with the Bennetts. Robert and Linda exchanged proud looks. "It will be a place," Jack explained, "where other families can find the support Sarah once needed, where children like Emma and the twins can find safety and love, a place that honors our past by turning it into hope for the future." Weeks later, the whole family gathered for a tour of the renovated school. The Victorian facade retained its majestic exterior, but the inside had been entirely transformed. Modern classrooms, a medical wing supervised by Sarah, a library with a children's reading program spearheaded by Ryan, plus community and psychological support areas. Emma raced down the hallways, her baby brothers trying to follow in their still wobbly steps. Linda and Sarah chatted enthusiastically about the programs they could develop together, while Robert discussed funding details with Ryan. Jack paused in the middle of the main lobby, watching his entire family, every part of it, united in a common goal. The place where his story began, where he'd found Emma and the twins, would now be a starting point for other stories of love and redemption. "What are you thinking about?" Emma asked, coming to hold his hand. Jack smiled, lifting her into his arms. "About how sometimes we need to get lost to find ourselves. About how love can heal old wounds and create new beginnings. Like in Uncle Ryan's stories," she asked with that uncanny wisdom that always surprised him. "Exactly like Uncle Ryan's stories," he agreed, kissing her forehead. The afternoon sun streamed through the arched windows, illuminating the new center's logo, a tree with many different branches, all connected to the same strong trunk. That was how Jack saw his family now, different branches growing in various directions, but sharing the same roots of love, understanding, and forgiveness. Sarah approached, holding one of the twins while Ryan played with the other. Linda and Robert looked on with serene smiles. In that moment, there were no more secrets, no more pain, just the realization that family is something you create day by day, with love, patience, and the courage to start over again and again.